First, I want to welcome everyone to another episode of Take Note, a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs and change makers making a difference in their profession and community. Today, we are joined by litigator and trial attorney Parag Amin. This is a special episode for us today because Parag also happens to be a very close friend of mine and was one of my groomsmen at my wedding. Parag and I first met at a meeting for lawyers who meditate here in Los Angeles, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that because it's probably raises some questions. And that was about 5 years ago. While most of the meeting was silent, we both enjoyed meeting new people, and it was only a matter of time until Parag and I started chatting. After running into each other a few times, we realized how much we had in common, and at one point discussed joining our law firms. In the end, we didn't end up wanting to jeopardize our friendship, so we kept our law firm separate. But it's something that was actually an interesting discussion that we went through in the course of talking to many different people. Came to the conclusion that it was maybe best to have separate law firms but work together on many cases, which we have done over the years. But this is definitely something that maybe is worth talking about today because it's a question for a lot of entrepreneurs in terms of, when's the right time to partner? How do you choose your partners? What are considerations to make? Parag is not only a fantastic business and personal injury lawyer, but also a super interesting person with a deep compassion and empathy for those around him. As a result of his dedication to helping his clients, he has been featured in numerous publications, including the LA Times and Rolling Stone magazine. He has been selected as a rising star by SuperLawyers in 2017, 2018, and 2020. We're going to have to ask what happened in 2019. But
I did get awarded for 2019, actually.
Oh, did it? Okay. All right. So he has secured large settlements for his clients and obtained successful outcomes when clients had lost hope. His background in finance and other jobs that he will discuss today has given him a unique ability to connect with clients and build a truly service-oriented practice. Without further ado, Parag, welcome to Take Note.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. I have a bunch of questions that, I want to kind of go through today, but also this is going to be a very also kind of organic conversation. You and I have had many, many conversations, sometimes over a few drinks, about life and business and, sitting in our office, chatting about how, we are going to map the future for our firms. But just for the listeners, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, kind of where you grew up and how you went from Maryland, a small town in Maryland, to the bright lights of LA.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town known as Salisbury, Maryland. It's like a very small rural place. Population was about 30,000 people. And so it was pretty laid back there. Everybody kind of knew everybody. And so what brought me out here was I had a friend during college who was a party promoter, and he was promoting a party here in Los Angeles. And so he's like, hey, look, why don't you come out here and come with me, come check it out. So I did, and I fell in love with LA. I mean, everything from the culture here to the weather to the people, there's always something to do. And so I had this idea that, one day I'd love to go live in LA. And so when I started applying for law schools, UCLA and USC were my top choices. And so luckily I got in, and it ended up going to USC, and I haven't looked back since. The plan has always been to come out here and make a living, and I don't see myself moving out of here anytime soon.
It's amazing. Goal is to make a living, and you made a life out here in LA.
Yeah, huh? Absolutely.
and yeah, you got married. How long were you in LA before you got married?
I was here for 5 years before I ended up getting married. So my now wife, I did know her before I moved out here, but we weren't dating or anything. We started dating in law school, and it just kind of worked out really well. She likes to joke that I moved out here because she lived out here. Don't tell her that's not exactly true, but
maybe there's some element of truth to that. Who knows?
Who knows? Conscience is a powerful thing. So in either case, it worked out really well. So I'm married to the girl of my dreams. I love living in LA. It's the city of my dreams in terms of living in different places, and no regrets. Honestly, every day here in LA feels like I just landed. I've been here since '08, so it's been 12 years now. And it never gets old.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to talk a little bit more about, Maryland too and growing up, but I mean, I also want to ask, what do you think it is about LA that is so attractive to so many people? Because from around the world, people want to come to LA, but I always thought about like, what is it exactly that's so captivating about the city? What do you think?
I think that it's like a land of dreamers. Everybody, it feels like, comes out here with a dream and a hope of doing something. For some people that's show business, whether that's the movies, whether that's singing or dancing. But for other people, like you and me, I think we both kind of had the similar idea that we'd love to come out here and maybe start our own practices. I think that you had that pretty early on when you moved from Arizona as well, right? You wanted to
Yeah.
come out here and eventually start your own practice. And I think that the culture and the vibe of the city very much supports that. It's very kind of free spirited. And that's one of the things I love about living here is that everybody here, for the most part, is supportive, and everybody's kind of aspiring to be something, and that kind of thing is electric, and it's infectious. It's always good to be around people who are chasing something and dreaming bigger dreams, and I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why people love LA. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think, that's what it was for me, the allure of, I mean, sometimes it was the bright lights. I also moved from a somewhat small town, probably not as small as Salisbury, but, Tucson, Arizona. It's a college town, and, I grew up there. I went to school there. And, I always wanted to do something bigger. And I always loved, entertainment, and it's funny you mentioned, some people come out here to dance. I didn't come out here to dance, but I technically took a couple of classes when I was, when I first moved out here. And I think just the energy, right? I think you and I both respond to energy of people, of in life and events. We both are kind of gravitate towards that, and I think that's what it is about LA. You meet a lot of people who are really, trying to do something, and sometimes it may seem, crazy that, that they're trying to do things, but this podcast is a lot about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurship. And I think you have to be crazy, right? You have to be a little crazy to start a practice in LA and lawyers. I mean, I was working in Tucson before I moved out here, and the partners of the firm, they were encouraging. They're like, yeah, great, you passed the California bar. That was hard. Great, good for you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to move out there. They're like, why? Like, we were in a recession. It was like 2010, 2009, 2010. They're like, why on earth would you move out to LA? There are so many lawyers out there, and what are you going to do? And I said, I'll figure it out. I had a job lined up, and a contract job with a firm, and yeah, it was tough. And I think, as you and I can chat a little bit about the challenges of, obviously, opening up your own firm and building it and growing it. It's not for the faint of heart, but I think you and I now are at a place where probably maybe we didn't even imagine, right? 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is that idea of your boss is telling you that, what are you going to do there, and being so pessimistic about it, and you deciding to come here anyways. I think that embodies the spirit of LA. And so when I was in law school, my law school roommate lived in Hawaii for a couple of years before he came here for law school, and he was an avid surfer, very good at surfing, loved to surf, and so he kind of got me into it. And one morning I'd gone out by myself, and I drove up the one, which is the Pacific Coast Highway, towards Malibu. And it was early in the morning. It was about 6:30. And,
This
I
is
was,
in law school?
this was during law school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was putting on my wetsuit. I was, it was the middle of law school. You're nervous. I mean, that's, we can talk about that too, how insecure law school can make you,
Yeah.
because, you're used to being doing well academically, and it's such a challenging environment. And because everything's graded on a curve, it just becomes increasingly competitive, and that can take like a heavy mental stress if you let it. And so we could talk a little bit more about dealing with stress too, because I think that a lot of people are dealing with that right now. So I end up going to the surf spot on the one right up PCH, And I'm putting on my wetsuit, and I see two homeless guys who had just woken up, and they had their sleeping bags, and they had their sleeping bags along the coast. And just then the sun was rising too, and they had woken up, and we just kind of had a casual conversation about, them and the fact that they're living there and they're homeless. And they, in reality, they woke up to a multi-million-dollar view, even though they were homeless, right? And they were in good spirits. They were good natured about it. And for whatever reason, that just kind of stuck with me. Like this is a city that'll find a way to take care of you. That you just got to have, hope, and you'll always find a way here regardless. I mean, because, here's two guys looking at a multi-million-dollar view, waking up first thing in the morning. And some people would argue they've got nothing, but, that view is just incredible.
Right.
And so I think that, in this city, if you just stay focused and you keep pushing, like you'll find a way here. And I think that's what's so attractive about Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think you raised the question about the idea of doubt, and in law school and the stress and pressure that law school puts on people. And I think it's a great segue, because I dealt with that a lot too in law school. I think anyone who, if you're not a lawyer and you're thinking, you see, lawyers have this, somewhat glamorous life, as portrayed in the movies and on TV. It's obviously very, very different than what they show on TV. Unfortunately, they never show the research. They never show the time on Westlaw or drafting things.
Advertising. They never show the stuff that's not sexy.
Exactly. So, but it's so funny. But the idea of doubt and persistence, I think that's something that every entrepreneur, anyone who's striving for anything, honestly, deals with. And how have you dealt with those two things? And maybe talking a little about law school, and even once you started opening your own practice, how have you balanced the whole idea of doubt and persistence?
So I think that doubt is always something that I think it can be a negative thing or a positive thing. So with self-doubt, I think it can come from a place of either feeling unprepared or feeling like you're not good enough, right? So if it comes from a place of feeling like you're not good enough, that's a destructive type of self-doubt, because when you approach something from that perspective, you'll never be good enough. You'll never measure up, and that'll affect your performance. But I think that if you look at doubt as if, am I sufficiently prepared? Did I put in the work? I think that kind of doubt can actually help propel people forward, and it's helped propel me forward in terms of making sure that I'm adequately prepared. Like, for example, when I'm trying cases or litigating cases, every single time it's an older attorney who I'm going up against. And, it's scary because there's a lot of unknowns in litigation and trial work. And part of dealing with the unknown is you have a lot of variables, and you're not sure exactly how you're going to be able to react. And the reality is you can't prepare for every circumstance or contingency that might come up. So you just have to take your time to prepare, and then trust yourself, kill the self-doubt that's I'm not good enough. I think that's the type of thinking that really can have no positive benefit. Whereas that feeling of doubt of, hey, did I do the work? Did I, make sure I reviewed everything I needed to review, or, prepare everything I needed to prepare? I think thinking of things that way helps all of us get further, because we're better prepared when we show up. Mm-hmm. So I think that, that's like the biggest thing as it relates to self-doubt, is that it's inevitable in everybody's life. I think that everybody has it, but it's just maintaining it and persevering through it, just continuing to believe in yourself that, look, at the end of the day, you've got to keep pushing forward. And, I've got this running joke that I sometimes tell my wife, when I've had a bad day, which is, I can't lose forever, right? I just, it's going to get better. And so I think that if you approach things with that mentality, it'll inevitably, everything will get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I want to talk more about, quotes and books too. We're going to definitely get to that. But it reminds me, I think it was James Clear, Atomic Habits, or one of those books where I was listening to, and he talks about, the importance of the word yet. you're not there yet. Right. And I always love the idea that like, oh, it's always really important to remind yourself as an entrepreneur, as in sports and whatever you do in life, is that everyone starts as an amateur before you become a professional. Right. And I think, reminding yourself of but you, to get to the professional, you got to put in hours and hours and hours of work and repetition. And, there is no shortcut, to really to get to the top. And I think, we're oftentimes today with technology and new apps and new, software, we're all looking for everyone's looking for shortcuts. I look for shortcuts, because I think we also want to make ourselves more efficient. But I find myself, talking about, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's talking about doubt and fear. Sometimes this shows up as like me looking for new tools and new ways to do things is sometimes is my way of maybe just distracting from what the challenge is ahead of me, right? I've got to do something that's really hard, and instead I'll, allow myself to get distracted and look into a more efficient way of doing what I'm doing. But realistically, we just got to do it, do the work.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that both have their places, though, right? So, it's good to always look for ways to do things more efficiently, and I love that about you and your practice. You've always been at the forefront of making sure that you're utilizing technology well, and I think that's great because it can help you in a lot of ways. So I think that kind of setting. So one example for me that I've found useful in my own life is I do the same thing. So if I'm looking for a solution, I will just set a timeline for myself, right? So I'm giving myself either X days, X hours, X minutes to find this solution or to look for the solution. So it doesn't end up becoming, me spending hours and hours or days and days looking for a solution and avoiding doing the work.
Yeah.
And vice versa, the work ultimately needs to be done, but if you can do it more efficiently with a tool or a solution, then by all means do that. But
right.
I think that a lot of us try to, sometimes avoid the hard stuff by looking for ways to do things easier. Right. And I think, one of the things about that is all of us ultimately at the end of the day, we like comfort. As humans, we all want to be comfortable. And the hard thing about doing hard work is that typically it's not comfortable.
Right.
The hard thing about getting feedback, whether it's, public speaking or whether it's, a draft on something that you've done and sending it to a client, if you're not completely sure about it, I mean, you're going to get at least some negative feedback about how to correct it. And that's uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, that's the only way that we can grow. So I found that to be incredibly helpful too, is to just kind of focus on not seeking comfort. At the end of the day, it's the discomfort that helps us grow.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so important. You're right. I think the discomfort really, does help us grow. And I think being, talking a little bit, I think about how we become okay with discomfort, right? I think you and I are both interested in meditation. We met at a law and meditation meeting, in LA, how many 4 or 5 years ago now. And tell me about like how meditation has influenced that, your ability to deal with discomfort and even your practice in general.
Yeah. So meditation, when I started meditation, I started it because I was feeling a lot of discomfort. I was feeling overwhelmed with school, work, and all the other challenges that you have. I'm living across the country from my parents, so I don't have any family here in California. So all of those things are starting to weigh on me. I mean, I was lucky enough to have good friends who would help me through, but when you don't know anybody here and it's a new city, other than the friends you made in law school, it can be challenging, particularly when everybody's busy, everybody's working, and it feels like you're going through something alone. And so I turned to meditation to help me with that, because I saw that the alternative path, the destructive path that we hear a lot about in law school is the substance abuse issues that lawyers fall into. And for whatever reason, lawyers have multiples. The rate at which lawyers get addicted to substances is multiples higher than the person who's not a lawyer. And I think that a large part of that is the inability to deal with stress. So I recognized that pretty early on, that I needed to find a tool to be able to deal with that stress, to find an outlet that was positive. And so that's what I use meditation to do, was just help quiet my mind, ease down, because, one of the things I think that Eastern philosophy recognizes that Western philosophy necessarily doesn't, is this idea that you shouldn't always be thinking. You want to leave a gap. You want to leave a space so that you can actually adjust and react. And, the whole Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I think that mentality really summarizes the intellectual approach to things. But the problem with that is that there's no end to thought if you let it run on forever.
Yeah.
And the human mind isn't truly made to think endlessly. It needs a pause, it needs a break, and it needs to be able to reflect and take all the different pieces that we gather, in a day from our experience to be able to put the puzzle together and come up with a solution. But if we're constantly bombarding it with more and more information, then it never ends. And so what I found meditation does for me is it ends up helping me slow down and step back and see the bigger picture. So I found that it's helped me tremendously in terms of dealing with difficult opposing counsel, dealing with difficult situations, dealing with difficult cases where I'm not sure exactly what the next move is or what the right move is, because there's a lot of variables. So the ability to step back and reflect on the bigger picture has helped me make better decisions. And ultimately, that's really what I was looking for, was the ability to make better decisions and feel more comfortable about it.
Yeah.
What brought you to the meeting? Because I think you had been meditating much longer than I had when I first started. I was brand new to it, but I think you had been doing it for a while, right?
Yeah. For me, it was community. It's really about, like, there's meditating in the kind of Buddhist world, they call it a sangha, of like the family, like a community of meditators. And I think there's real power, going back to energy, to meditate in a group like that versus on your own. It provides a different energy. And I've, now been fortunate to go to several different retreats, extended retreats, in meditation, and it's really powerful to kind of sit with a group. And also I think the discussion that we had afterwards as lawyers, because, you realize that you're not alone. And I think that is so important, so valuable, is to have a group of attorneys dealing with similar issues, dealing with challenging opposing counsel. Who knows? Sometimes they could be your opposing counsel. Who knows? In that room, and you realize that you can separate the person from maybe the issue, right? You can make that separation, which is so important. I think lawyers. There's so many issues with lawyers and identity, right? I think we work so hard, spend so much money, go through so much to get this name, to get this title, and then we I think tie our identity so much to that title that it creates a lot of suffering for us. Right? Because now anytime that identity it's a kind of a flimsy identity, because anytime that identity is challenged, or that any identity is saying, oh, wait, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, or this identity says I should be, all of a sudden we go through some stress or some challenging time and suffering and turmoil internally because of that. So I think it's like really about letting go of that identity. I love your, the Descartes quote and contrasting that to really, Eastern philosophy, because I think meditation, a lot of it for me has been about letting go. Is how do we let go? How do we let go of the identity, of the constructs that we have, of the stories that we have in our head about how things should be? Because so oftentimes those stories are what's creating the suffering. Right, it's creating the stress. As lawyers, we have deadlines. Yes, there's briefs and motions that are due, especially in litigation. There's difficult timelines, difficult opposing counsel. You and I have worked on some challenging cases together where our clients are not always agreeable, not always easy to deal with. Opposing counsel is not always easy to deal with. But I've always been, I've been impressed with how you kind of deal with opposing counsel in a kind of very pragmatic way, and not making it personal when sometimes, opposing counsel may say things that are attacking and trying to kind of get under your skin. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with, difficult opposing counsel in times where, yeah, sometimes they're trying to use their leverage in a way that, tries to get under your skin.
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of litigation is about leverage, and a lot of it ends up, I've realized over time, is in a way a mind game that opposing counsel's going to be posturing. They're going to be talking about earlier on in my career, they wanted to talk to me about how many years of experience they had. When I was a baby lawyer coming out, when I was practicing for maybe 2 or 3 years, they wanted to tell me how they had decades of experience. And that doesn't come up as much anymore. It still does, but I think that it comes up to a lesser extent. And so the reality of it is I've learned now that whenever opposing counsel tells me how long they've been practicing, they feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because the only reason they're telling me that is for their own ego. They want to prove to themselves that they're up to the challenge. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter to me whether they've been practicing for 5 years or 50 years. If they're good, they're good. And if they're right, they're right. Ultimately, it just comes down, I think, to the skill set and the skill level. So meditation has helped me tremendously in that regard, because it's helped me kind of see through those issues where, they'll layer on with the ego and the personal attacks, things that have nothing to do with the case. And so, I found that making those kinds of personal attacks ends up just wasting everybody's time, and it doesn't help the case move forward. It doesn't help the case in any way. Yeah. And so, what I found to be much more helpful and much more successful now is, it actually reminds me of a story where one of the first cases I had, it was an older lawyer. He had been sworn in 1986. So to put that into context, I was born in 1986.
Okay.
And so he had been practicing law as long as I had been alive. And so it was a very contentious case, and there was a lot of money involved. It was a multi-six-figure case, and it was one of my first cases that I had coming out of law school with my own firm. And at the beginning of that case, every turn, he made it a point to let me know how I was less experienced, how I didn't know what I was doing. I remember at the deposition, or one of the depositions in that case, it was one of my first depositions I'd ever taken. And at the end, there's something called a stipulation. And so it's kind of it's a long thing, and I won't get into it right now, but it's about essentially who's going to take possession of the transcript, what's going to happen to it. And I didn't want to get it wrong, so I had it written down on a piece of paper, and I was reading it. And he starts laughing. Literally, my client's in this room, his clients are in the room, court reporters are in the room, and he starts laughing. He's like, you don't even know this stipulation. You're just reading it off a piece of paper. So that made me really uncomfortable. And I realized, I got through the stipulation, and then we ended up settling that case. It settled favorably for my client. And then it's funny because I had another case with that same attorney a couple years later. And at that point, he gave me props. He's like, look, like, you're a smart kid. He was an older guy, so that's kind of how he referred to me. He said, look, we should try to resolve this. And so we ended up sitting down and talking about the case over a couple of beers. And we didn't settle it that night, but the next morning he gave me a call and we ended up settling the case. And, that wouldn't have been possible. It wouldn't have been possible had I not, come to the realization at a certain point that, at the end of the day, it's about resolving the case. And regardless of what he says about me or my client, facts are the facts. And, if we can't settle it, we've got to go to trial. But I think that it's the biggest part of it is having that comfort level with yourself and becoming comfortable with yourself so you can take the criticism and continue with your job rather than letting it eat away and destroy you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So first going to ask, like, what was different about talking to him 3 years later versus, that initial interaction with him? How was he different towards you?
He was more respectful, I would say. He had more deference. When I take a position, it wasn't an immediate attack. It seemed like he was actually considering what I was saying to him. And part of it was also, there were 3 years of experience, not just on that case, but with a lot of other cases that helped me, as a lawyer. And looking back, I always like to reflect back and think about, okay, what were the lessons there? So I could use them later.
Right.
And, I was looking at it from the lens of, okay, from a legal perspective, would I have done anything differently? Did I handle it correctly? And the reality of it is that I realized that everything was done correctly. So it wasn't, I was doing, a bunch of things wrong here. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, I had figured it out. It was, a lot of it was just the head game, the mind game. And I think, part of it, and it wasn't just that one particular lawyer. I think part of litigation in particular is the other lawyer wants to see if you can make it through, right?
Yeah.
If you've got what it takes in terms of mental stamina and perseverance to be able to continue on despite these attacks.
Yeah.
And so I think that the best way to deal with it is to just not spend any energy on the attacks, right? Not let it eat away with you, because that's precious mental energy that you're going to need to do things that are actually productive.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. And I think in life too, like it's, we all encounter things that we are doing for the first time. Right. And sometimes higher stakes situations, law is generally kind of, high stakes. It's not, it's not life or death, which sometimes I think, interpret it as, I think physiologically, because, the way our fight or flight, motor is kicked off. But yeah, I mean, I think we often, because I think loss of identity does do that to you, like the challenge to your identity does trigger something in us. But I think, I've been, one of the things that I think has been so helpful for me, and I think you do very, very well, is the preparation, right? I think the preparation in sports is so important, and the practice, how you practice is you're going to be how you play. I know with your cases do a really great job of spending the time, sitting down with a client, before the deposition or before, a hearing or something like that, and really getting to know the facts and clarifying everything with them. Where did you learn that, and how do you feel that has helped you be successful in the practice?
I think that, and I appreciate the kind words, by the way. So I think that to be successful in anything requires the ability and the determination to go through the details. I think that, regardless of what field you're in, particularly in the law, but regardless of the field, it's so incredibly important to pay attention to the details. And a lot of us, it's easy to overlook the details, because going into the details, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is it can be uncomfortable. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of mental energy to go through that, to make sure that you're adequately prepared. But ultimately, that's what it takes to win, is you've got to make sure those details are right. And so that's what drives me, is I don't look at it just as a case. I look at my cases as there's a person here, or there's a family here, or there's a business here that's owned by this person or these people, and they're going to be affected if I don't do the work. I'm going to let them down. So it's when I take that approach, as opposed to an egotistical approach of, oh, I can't lose, I don't want my reputation to go down. I mean, sure, obviously that's a part of it. You don't want to be known as the lawyer who loses a lot. But I think that from a broader perspective of needing to keep going, focusing on the bigger picture of how you're helping people, how it makes a difference, that's been huge for me. And I've noticed that about you too with your practice. And that's, one of the many reasons we were talking about merging our firms, is that mentality for client service and customer service, and making sure you take a customer and client centric approach to practicing law. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I echo your underscore of how important it is to prepare, and the value of preparation with all these clients, whether it be a negotiation, or you're preparing for a deposition, or me before I get on a call to discuss a contract or a term sheet. The more preparation you do, and it's not always easy, because we have so many things on our plate, right? And there's so many things that we need to do, especially as owners of law firms. But to set that time aside to really do that, clients don't really see it. I don't think they always really recognize it. And, but that really, I think, creates a difference between, a decent lawyer and one of the better lawyers is taking that time to really think through those issues. For me, in terms of the client services and building a law firm like that, I think I think it starts with the owner, right? You are the owner, I'm the owner, and I think you and I do see eye to eye on a lot of those things. And it's I mean, I think it's interesting even in the context of partnering up in with a business, entrepreneurship in general, having a co-founder, having multiple co-founders in a business. We see a lot of successful companies, that have 2 or 3 co-founders that have, unique skills and are able to navigate it. I know you and I had chatted for a while about, the idea of partnering up, and we realized that we could still, essentially work together, but, have our own firms. What are your thoughts on having a partner in law or in business? And do you feel like, it's better to try it, or do you feel like, maybe it's better just to do your own thing and then maybe just have like kind of associated people?
So, so this answer is kind of based on things that mentors have told me as well. So this isn't, I want to make clear that this isn't just my analysis of it. I think that it's good to have partners, if it makes sense, right? So a lot of people get into partnerships for the wrong reasons. So one example is if somebody feels like they have a deficiency in one area. Let's say, one person is great at doing the legal work, but then another person is really good at rainmaking and bringing clients in. So it seems, okay, well, this could be a really good partnership because, let's say the rainmaker isn't particularly good at servicing the clients, and the person who's really good at servicing the client isn't great at bringing in the clients. In that situation, I think that they could both see, okay, well, it makes sense for us to partner up. But I think that it has to go deeper than that. I think that they have to take a look at every aspect of their lives and whether they're going to match up, because ultimately getting into a partnership, you're dealing not only with that person's business side, but their personal side, their family side, in terms of how their life is going to change or evolve. And you want to make sure that you're in the same respect on all of these different angles. And because there's so many variables in all of our lives, I think that thinking through those issues early on is extremely helpful. Like for us, we were talking about it for months, and we realized that, we're doing well referring business to each other. And, we both wanted that sense of control, and we both, didn't have to go to partners to get approval to make a decision. And I think that was kind of the biggest thing for both of us, was we stepped back and said, hey, wait a second, is control something I'm willing to give up for the purposes of having a partner? Or is it more beneficial for, that partner to have, their own business or their own firm, and me to have my own business and my own firm? And we can refer business back and forth while still continuing to have that collaborative relationship that, also results in more business, because you can each run your business your own ways. And so I would say that is probably the biggest thing, is just thinking through those challenges and not just the good things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's so true. And I think getting to the details, because you're right, because like just because you guys have complementary skills is not enough, or, different skills, because I think we had talked to, we had lunch with several different people, and one of the individuals we had lunch with, I remember he was kind of the rainmaker for his firm, and that became very difficult for him because he was the one having with the pressure to bring in the business constantly. And then the other lawyers in the firm had more of a contingency practice. So they would get paid out, every a year or a year and a half, but, it'd be good payouts, but, what about the monthly spend that you guys have, to do? So I think that was a challenge, and maybe they weren't all on the same page when that was first, thought of, or maybe first addressed. And I even had a personal experience. I learned kind of the hard way, and which is where, I advise clients all the time, as, who are in partnerships, or, we are discussing operating agreements and whatnot, the challenges that could come up. You don't think about, communication and goals, personal goals. If your goal is to make $1 million a year, but the other person wants to maybe have more of a family life, and, is fine with, $100,000 a year, that's not always going to make sense unless you guys can make sure that the documents allow for that to happen, right? If someone wants to put in, 23 hours a day to the firm and make $1 million, but the other person wants to put in, 8 or 10, then I think you just have to have that understanding that, yes, the one person may not be compensated as much for what they're putting in, but you guys can still grow a firm together. And I think, the importance of also preserving relationships, because, when if these partnerships fail, it can really put a strain on that friendship or that partnership, which is, I think, not something that I think you and I really wanted at risk too, because, we're good friends and whatnot. But, I've seen him work too. So it's not to say that, it can't work, but I think there's a lot more to consider, and probably getting advice from mentors, advisors, other people in your network is really smart before you kind of jump into a partnership or, multiple partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it absolutely can work. And it's not to say, like, for example, if we had partnered up, it's not to say that it wouldn't work. I think
Right.
it probably would have. It's just, I think that there's trade-offs, as with anything in life, right? There's trade-offs, and it's, it comes down to that, and the ability to say, okay, well, I think that the biggest thing for a successful partnership, I think, is similar to good marriage, right? Just having open communication, having the ability to trust the other side with, or your partner with, whatever it is you're going to tell them, and however it is that you're feeling, whatever it is you want to express, and then them being open with you, and then the ability to kind of work through whatever challenges they are, and talk through those issues. And I think that a lot of marriages and partnerships fall apart for that reason. We never had that. We always had, the ability to kind of chat through things and talk through issues. So that's been great. The other part of it is considering geography too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether you want to have your partners nearby, or whether they can move. And that could be a big aspect to it too, is okay, where the office is going to be located. Is everybody going to have to come into the office? And who does the staff report to? And some of those other issues. So, absolutely it can work. And I think the key to any of it is just having good mechanisms in place to be able to work through the issues. I mean, I think you made a great point of, if somebody wants to work 23 hours a day and the other partner wants to work 8 to 10 hours a day, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work. It just means that you got to talk through that and figure out, okay, what makes sense in that regard between the allocation of the time and the resources and the money that's coming in, so everybody's happy and nobody feels like they're putting in more than the other person.
Yeah. And I think the parallel to like a marriage makes perfect sense, right? And I think of marriages, if we did this with our, personal partners, it makes a lot of sense too, right? Like talking about your values and talking about, what your goals are for the future. Not always do we do that with even our partner as we're dating, right? Because we feel sometimes that's a little bit too formulaic or whatever it might be. But I think, having those conversations with them, and also I think communication, right? How we communicate is so important, right? It's not always what you say, but how you say it. And I think, one thing you talk about law school, it breaks you a little bit as a person, when you become a lawyer.
Some of us are still trying to fix ourselves from it.
Somewhere along the lines, I don't know exactly the pinpoint, the day and the time where my mind broke, and it was kind of now put together in terms of how you discuss things and talk about things. But somewhere along the lines that you have to unlearn some things when you're now talking to your partner, or even maybe even just anyone else, because you look at things differently and you evaluate things differently based on your teaching in law school. But then that doesn't always translate well to to real life. So one great book that I recommend to everyone is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Goldsmith, I think. We'll have to put that in the show notes. But it's one of the great ways to really, it's a way to get your point across to people without having them feel defensive, or you feeling you saying in a way that maybe may encourage people to feel defensive, because I think that's sometimes so important, just how we say things to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting that a lot of practicing law is the ability to communicate, yet we don't have any communications courses. At least, in my law school, I didn't have any communications courses, and I don't even think any were offered.
Right.
So, it's bizarre, since at the end of the day, regardless of whether you're in litigation or whether you're in transactional work, the ability to communicate and to understand where the other side's coming from and have that emotional rapport and that emotional IQ is so crucial, but we don't have any classes on it. We're just expected to kind of know it.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky enough that you and I kind of focus on that, and naturally kind of understand that's so important. But I think that a lot of other lawyers struggle with that because nobody's told them that that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's so true because just us talking to other lawyers, you see that it's like, it's not a normal conversation, and I think that's a lot of it's fear, a lot of it's, a lot of it, of these insecurities that come out, when you deal with these other lawyers, but yeah, if they're not given the tools, meditation or other coping mechanisms to deal with those insecurities, then it comes out in unfortunate ways that I think causes suffering and trauma to those around you, right? And I think that's why divorce rates, substance abuse is so high in the legal community because we don't have proper dealing mechanisms with that. I'm glad, I know there's a lot more people now emphasizing this in the legal community, but I think it's still a long ways to go to right the ship. So.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and also talk a little bit more about your firm and kind of what you do, because I know you have you and I have worked on some business litigation cases, some IP litigation cases, but I know you have a very successful and busy personal injury practice as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the types of cases you take on, maybe an interesting story of one of the cases you handled where I know there's a few big judgments you were able to get for a client. I remember there was one case where 2 or 3 lawyers passed on it and you got it and were able to settle it for multiple 6 figures. So maybe if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, the way I kind of summarize it is my firm represents injured people and injured businesses. So on the business litigation end, we deal with a lot of breach of contract type cases, disputes with vendors, disputes with customers or other businesses as it relates to whether it's contractual relations where they had a contract and somebody simply didn't perform, or more recently, we've seen a large uptick in partnership disputes where partners in a business, one's accusing the other of taking more money out than they should have in the form of distributions or expenses that were personal expenses but were run through the business. And so, in that regard, it's all, financial injuries that we're dealing with. And in the personal injury realm, we deal with a lot of car crash cases, trip and falls, slip and falls, that kind of thing. And, in either one of those, I think that the key is just understanding what the client is looking for. It's the more money, generally speaking, that we're looking for in a case, the more heavily it's going to be litigated. And that's okay. It's just, we always want to make sure that we're aligned with the client. So, the case you were talking about with that ended up being a referral from your firm, right? So,
Yeah.
so that was a case where the client had other lawyers, another prominent personal injury lawyer who he had worked with, and that lawyer had recommended that he take a certain settlement, and I didn't feel like it was sufficient, and so what ended up happening was that particular individual was looking for other lawyers and happened to connect with my firm through you. And what had ended up happening was the client had been riding his bicycle down the street when he got hit by a car. And so he suffered severe injuries to his leg, fractured leg. He had a blood clot that came loose. And so that caused him to be hospitalized for multiple days. So it was a traumatic experience for him, and it was heavily litigated. And it was a situation in which that lawyer was saying, well, look, I really think that you got to take this, the settlement offer, because it was very close to trial at that point. It had been litigated for years. And the client's position was that in reality wouldn't be able to get much of anything after paying his medical bills because his medical bills were so high. So my office stepped in and, I talked to the client to talk to him about, what his realistic expectations were, what he'd like to do, what are his fears, what's the ideal outcome here, and what are you most afraid of, to get both ends of the spectrum. So then we can work towards coming up with a solution that works for the client. And so we ended up litigating the case, and it was a very big, large defense firm here in Southern California that was handling the defense, and one of their top trial attorneys was going to be trying it. And we ended up going to mediation, and we ended up settling the case for multiples of what that original lawyer had recommended the client settle it for. And I think part of it was just the willingness to work it up, the willingness to, sit with the client and completely understand how this injury affected their life. Because at the end of the day, it's not just, an injury. It's not just a case. This is somebody's life that we're dealing with. Yeah. And so I always want to make sure that I understand how it's affected their life so I can communicate it to whether it's a jury, whether it's a mediator. You just want to make sure that you're able to connect them with the client in terms of how they're feeling. So, my approach to both of those areas, business litigation and personal injuries, at the end of the day, having the emotional intelligence to say, okay, what is it that you really want? And how do we get there? So my job is to, I tell my clients, it's their job to tell me what they want, and it's my job to try to figure it out and try to help them get what they want. Right. And so, I think that that's something that's also missed, and I haven't heard of law schools teaching that, but at the end of the day, that's something that's so critical is what does the client want? And I think that what we were talking about earlier can many times get in the way, of the ego of what is it that I want, right? Yeah. Do I want to take this case to trial because I think I can get multiple times what they're offering, or I can get double what they're offering. And now I've got, a huge verdict in my name versus the client maybe would have been happy to not go through trial and take the lesser money, but to not sit through trial. And at the end of the day, I think the most effective litigator is one that's willing to go through trial and is excited about trial, but doesn't necessarily force the trial just because they want to go through trial.
Right. No, it's so important. You're right. I mean, I think, if you're a litigator, you've got to be ready for trial. You've got to be ready to see the case the whole way, because I think if you're not, they can, I think other litigators can sometimes smell that and, could work against you. So, I think that's the mindset. Yeah, that's so important for being effective. So that's great. Yeah. And I know you have that mindset, us, chatting, many times, and you doing, all this additional work to be ready for trial is great. Very nice. Talking about kind of the current state of the world too, you mentioned you're seeing a lot more partnership disputes now. What have you seen? How's your practice changed, or what have you been seeing since the pandemic started in terms of the types of cases? I know people are driving less, so that's, affecting, kind of personal injury cases as well. How have things changed for you during the pandemic? And, do you have any advice for people kind of dealing with challenging issues with their business or injuries or something like that right now?
Yeah, so business has changed a lot for me, and I'm curious to hear, how it's changed for you as well, because you're right that car accident cases have dropped dramatically, which is good. Excuse me. It's good because, people aren't getting hurt as much, but the reality is that, business for us has slowed down. In car accident cases, slip and falls, trip and falls, any of those, because people aren't moving around as much, those cases have slowed. And a surprising turn has been that on our business litigation cases, which are primarily hourly cases, have seen a sudden uptick in disputes there's vendor disputes because, somebody's either refusing to pay because of, and it's generally not, them claiming, oh, well, we can't pay because of COVID. It's some other argument that they're trying to use to try to get out of paying. So we've seen a big uptick in that. And then, like I said, the partnership disputes, we've seen a big uptick in that. So what we've been doing now more so is focusing more also on business litigation matters. And so my office is launching a subscription service / a fractional general in-house counsel model that we're helping clients avoid these really expensive legal disputes because, when they come to me, it's usually too late at that point.
Right.
They've already, by the time they come to me to handle these disputes, and we've worked on these together where it's, it can be tens of thousands of dollars or more to resolve disputes that could have been dealt with much easier had it just had the proper contracts in place, had the issues been thought through properly before they got there. And so what I'm doing now is I'm thinking, okay, well, how can I help businesses avoid these really expensive mistakes? How can I help them avoid going into litigation, which is so time consuming and so expensive. And so we're reaching out to our former clients and seeing if that's of interest. And some clients have expressed interest that that's something that they're looking to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the subscription model is interesting. I've chatted about that a little bit. What what kind of motivated you to go to there? Because I know that's kind of a new way of practicing law, and not many other, especially older firms, are offering that. Why subscription model?
So I think the subscription model, two things. I think that on the one hand, it allows us to stay in touch with the clients and better understand their business. And that's from a client service perspective. From a revenue perspective, it's recurring revenue, which is great. But ultimately, I think it's a more unique and better ability to serve the client, because a lot of law firms haven't been doing it. You're right. It's the biggest companies tend to have law firms on retainers that they're paying on a monthly basis, and they get great legal advice. And many times they'll avoid these really expensive legal disputes because of that very reason. And so what I was saying was that a lot of these small to mid-sized businesses are having disputes that end up becoming something that is far more expensive once it's gone into litigation. And they could have avoided it had they just planned for it properly. Mm-hmm. So it's, that whole idea of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of medicine. And I think in this situation, it's extremely helpful if the clients, if I can be there to help them avoid these issues. So then they're not coming to me when, everything's kind of hit the fan and everything's all over the place. Because I've noticed that a lot of the contracts, and we've dealt with this on the cases that we've dealt with together, is contracts that other companies or other firms have drafted or the clients have taken from LegalZoom. Any of those companies where it's this more generic contract, they haven't thought through the problems, and it inevitably ends up resulting in far more in litigation expense than had they just dealt with it sooner. And so I think it's a good opportunity to provide value.
Yeah, so important. You're so right. Yeah, I mean, we have a subscription with some of our clients too, and we've been kind of talking about relaunching ours because it's so important, because I think that's the one unfortunate thing about a lawyer and even a doctor too, right? Like when people are scared to go to them because they're worried about the cost. And at least with doctors, you have insurance, right? And I think subscription plans are a little bit like insurance in some ways, that you have this, if you ever need it, and you can give us a call. But it's interesting that it hasn't really taken off as much. There's services out there that do offer kind of legal insurance, but they're you don't get the best quality there. I think I like the subscription because you can choose the right lawyer for you and then have them ready to go when you need them. Because with a lot of these other, services that have been around for a while, I think the problem is you get someone new every time, and they give you a form letter or a form contract, and they don't really think and listen about your issues. So yeah, that's great. And I love to see innovation. I think the law, you and I have talked about, many times, like the law is so slow to innovate at the speed that other industries are innovating, financial and other industries. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us, lawyers who are actually interested in innovation, to do something unique to improve we talk about client services. I've always talked about it's the user experience. When you think about software and technology, you have user interfaces, UI, UX, and the law, I think of it the same thing. How do you improve the client, the CI, CX, the client interface, the client interaction? Because really, I always think, when I tell my staff, we have Monday meetings, and I said, I always use this Maya Angelou quote, right? People, you might have heard it. It's like, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I think it's a human characteristic. It's a human element it's true across everyone, every race, sex, whatever it might be. Even money, right? When we're talking about money, it's a feeling that people have that you're really giving them, feeling of protection, of peace of mind. So it's beyond just numbers oftentimes with law. And I think you do a great job of really getting to that underlying concern of what clients want. They may say money, they may say, I want to make this oftentimes, how many times do we hear people say, I want to make this person pay? They did me wrong, I want to make them pay. but that doesn't, but then the question is like, how much do you want to pay to make them pay, right? Because it's a trade-off. And sometimes, we save clients from being their enemy, their worst enemy in some situations. So that's great. I think there's another 2 hours of things we could talk about, but I want to be conscious of your time. Maybe before we kind of sign off, maybe you can you tell people about how they get a hold of you? So certain things you guys got going on right now, and just where they find you.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. I've got new posts going up every day. You can find me at Parag Amin, so ParagAminesq on Instagram. You could also go to my website, which is www.lawpla.com. So those are the two best resources. Typically, we've also got a YouTube channel, but I found that people typically spend more time on Instagram than on YouTube. So we've got a lot more content on Instagram that you can find. And I mean, it's been great. It's always a pleasure chatting with you and talking to you about everything. It's you've always got nuanced insights into whether we're talking about sports or we're talking about practicing law or we're talking about technology and the way forward. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, man, for the time. And, I think everyone found this really helpful. It was really, really great to chat. And until next time, let's just say that.
Until next time.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right, Pankaj.
Bye.